right, so we are back, and just reminding everyone to subscribe and like and do all the things that help the podcast continue to get out there and make us keep coming back every week. But we'll jump right into our topic. So we today are going to talk a little bit about some of the implements we use in training and why we use them. We obviously have talked about identifying and making sure you're going after the right things. So not sort of like guessing with what you're going after with individual athletes, but then getting a little bit more specifically today into how we tackle those things and some of the things we've seen. So I think just like as an overarching theme, we can get something from an assessment that says, okay, this athlete doesn't set up their load enough in hitting, and so they don't rotate from the right places, and their hands sort of compensate for that, and they take over, and it becomes this like very handsy type swing. That's something that we would see in assessments kind of regularly with young athletes. And so knowing that, it's not as simple as we've seen from training to say, okay, athlete A, this is what happens in your assessment. Now just stop doing that. So let's get on front to us and just use your regular bat and regular softballs and just try to not do that. It's obviously more complicated than that. Not more complicated than that, but that's just not typically an effective training tool. And the athlete really doesn't make that change. And often if you're telling them that, they'll sort of like try to make that change, and it will be more negative. Like in hitting, we might see that they sort of like force their hands back, or they get into a worse position because of what you're telling them to do from that standpoint. And so what we do and the way that we tackle that is to give them tools that sort of guide them more to that. And we talked about versions of this, but it makes it either harder to accomplish the task. They can feel the task easier with the implement they're using. In hitting, a lot of times we're sort of like forcing bad feedback, meaning if they don't make that change, or they're not able to sort of rotate from the right place, they're going to get jammed, have a missed hit, not get the barrel to the ball. And the way that we can accomplish that is by often with the bats we put in their hands. So using some overload bats, we use short bats, long bats, different things. The angle we're coming at, and that sort of like environment is really important. And when we have athletes who are trying to make change without those tools or environment, like I said, it's either very just difficult for them and they can't feel it, or they don't make the change. And in the sort of worst case scenario, the version of their interpretation of that becomes something that's like maybe worse than what we're trying to go for. So we'll just dive into that a little bit today. I don't know if Ashley, you want to give an example on the pitching side, but then we can maybe talk about like kind of specific athletes of maybe not names, but specific scenarios that we've tried to go after, and maybe some of the tools that we would use for that.
Yeah, sure. I think, I kind of think of these concepts in a similar category, meaning there's the world where someone jumps into training and doesn't have an assessment. You could do that. Especially if you're jumping into training with us, because we have such a high level of education on even just looking at video, typically why a bat path would look like that, why arm path would look like that, especially if we get any data, if we see, the result of what's going on with the ball. And we can make some really, highly educated guesses on what needs to happen with patterns. But most athletes, obviously, like if you take all of the softball athletes in the country, most of them are not just doing training with us. So the idea of not having an assessment and just jumping into training and no one really knowing the route, like not only maybe like setting the appropriate goals, then understanding the root of why you aren't able to do those things, like that's just a mess. Like if you're in that world, which is most athletes, that's a mess. You are literally better off probably standing 6 inches from the wall, banging your head up against it, and like wishing something will change in between every bang, So I don't know. That's the visual that came to my head. So that's a terrible process. That's a terrible process. On the flip side, just waking everybody up this morning, a little laugh. On the flip side, getting assessment information is amazing. It's just like to me, it's an absolute no-brainer. You target exactly what you need to be able to, what your performance goals are, the root of the issue going on, how to target it. But then going out into this like empty space, like take this information to your standard traditional hitting/pitching coach is also a mess in our experience. And we know this because we have many cases where athletes will come for an assessment. They go just back into their typical world. And this doesn't mean, oh, no one out there knows how to train things. No one out there knows how to make change. That's not what I'm saying. But the amount, when we get into the sort of the details and how we attack making change, the implements we use, how we prescribe those implements, I mean, it's highly calculated and coming from a place of like years and years worth of information, data, et cetera. So when they just go out to a standard training approach, the way most lesson models are set up, they come back for assessment and surprise, surprise, everything's the same. And like, why wouldn't it be? It's like sometimes the drills they do look better, right? Like in the drill setting, maybe they're hitting the ball hard, but it's the same. And so we run into things a lot. And this has been something we've talked about a lot with our remote athletes, especially the difference between hitting and pitching, because at least, you know, the types of implements we utilize are often like different weights of balls, softballs, plyos, etc., in order to get the body into, maybe it's trying to get the arm into a better slot, create more length, create more rotation, try to understand how to unravel the arm a little bit faster, you know, through deceleration. Whatever it is that we're targeting there, we prescribe a certain weight and we do it in a very calculated way. And so they're using these implements. Now, our athletes have to have plyos. So when it comes to pitching, they're utilizing plyos. We are able to write exactly how to use them. So is there power in just utilizing plyos generally? Of course. Is there so much more power in prescribing them appropriately based on what you're trying to, change or what you're trying to tackle? Yes, of course. So I think we run into this with hitting sometimes because pitching is sort of simpler, right? You can get some weighted softballs anywhere, hopefully through us someday. But for now, you can get them pretty much anywhere. You can get our plyos. And then all you need is a target. And hitting, I think, is so interesting because so much of the environment that we design and that we have seen athletes just flourish in involves different types of bats, which are obviously long bat, short bat, overload bat, whatever it is that you're giving them. It's your version of weighted softball, different plyo weights. And then the piece, it's not just intensity, like throw it, go to a shorter distance. Like this is all something an athlete can manage. It's like, let's set up the machine to then test your ability. Like if this training implement were to be helping you tap into a better pattern and get your barrel path, into a better slot, et cetera, excuse my language if it's more pitching lingo. But then we would see that like when we put the ball here, when the machine is at this location, forget spin for a second, but just like location wise, you should be able to take the ball, right? You're able to say, this is your pattern. So this is the implement I'm going to give you. And this is the environment I'll set you up in for you, machine, location, etc. And the result we should be seeing is X when you're accomplishing that well. Yeah. When body and arms or body and
I think the perfect example of it, if we go back to the scenario. So like we see, okay, the way you're loading, we did an assessment and the way you're loading is just all counter rotation. There's no load of the sort of middle of your body. And so as a result of that, you, in order to not just fly open, you get into this early slot. Basically what we'll see is like elbows gets stuck to the back part of your body. And then now that's sort of causing some things. So that's something we would see in an assessment. What we could do and what sort of like often in the past, how that would have been hammered is like, let's just go on the tee and with your regular bat, and then let's not counter rotate so much. Like, let's just get a better load position. And what we see is like, that just doesn't translate. That is not the skill. They're never going to do it that slowly. And also, really, you don't know it just because you're seeing them counter rotate less, that is good what they're doing. Like, are they loading in the right place? Like, you're just still looking with your eyes off of the tee. And so what we, like our college athletes this summer, no one's going on the tee. If they're training with us, they're going right to short machine. And if they are remote, they're doing at least front toss to start. and going right into sort of like full intensity off the full machine in their drills, because while they are trying to make that change, we need realistic feedback in an environment that's telling them like, was that good or not? And it's not my eyeballs. It's not Kalia's eyeballs. That's not like, oh, that looked better. You did less counter. It's like, okay, but then they could have still not loaded in the right place, or that could be not a great fix for her. Like there has to be this adjustment where the actual task is telling you whether that's good or not, and not just some random like assessment of whether that's good. And so we see that, and forget the even implements of bats and stuff, which I get into. We see that all the time where we see these like body things we don't like in the swing, and we're like, well, I know how I can fix it. Just like put her on the tee and make her just swing 4 million times so she doesn't do that anymore. And what we have seen is either people come back in assessments and they are not improved, but I would say more commonly with that, they are worse. They are actively worse. Especially if they have come out of our environment or they have trained a little bit for a while, they go into those environments and they get worse because they've just been fed the wrong feedback over and over. So the tee is like such an obvious example. It's not to say, oh my God, anyone that swings up the tee is like not doing the right thing. We have our young athletes still swing up the tee because they need some like positive feel in their training. So there's a space for it, but a college athlete doesn't. I think just doesn't. And so you're just kind of wasting time in that scenario at best. And at worst, and often you're feeding some things for that athlete that aren't great. And then there's this idea of like, okay, now I'm in that space. I'm not on the tee. I'm in front toss. I'm in machine. The intensity is more appropriate. The task is more appropriate. When an athlete just swings their regular bat from their regular swing off of that environment, it's pretty unlikely for most athletes that they can make.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. They're going to do the exact same shit
over and over
and over
yeah.
and
yeah.
over and over.
Yeah.
Here's the visual of 6 inches from the wall. Keep banging your head.
Yeah. And I think there's 1%, 2% of athletes who could be in that environment and make change. That does exist. There is like, I think of, we wouldn't do it because it just feels like now I have to stand on top of this athlete and keep telling them what change to make. But like Katie Stewart can do some things like that. There are some really high body aware athletes who also, what I would say is probably why Katie can do that is because she's trained in this environment her whole entire life.
Absolutely.
And so she knows so much about what the corrections to tap into that now she can do this. And she probably couldn't have done that had she not come out of this training environment. So I guess big asterisk for the fact that there are athletes like that. But for most athletes, like they get what you're saying. They can see the environment or they can see what they're trying to accomplish, but they need to be fed. They need to be given feedback so much. So the athlete we're talking about with that, like, okay, they sort of over counter rotate, they slot really early. Like an environment we would give them would be angle in with a short bat. And so now all of a sudden, a ball is coming in towards me. If I'm getting stuck to the side of my body, like I can't get through it. And so all I have to say to that athlete then is like, get the barrel to the ball, right? And give them feedback of when they've got the barrel to the ball. You can do that on a field. They can obviously see, when they drive the ball with hit tracks or Repsodo to see what exit velocity is and where it goes. Like you're just trying to make sure they know what it feels like to get the barrel to the ball. But otherwise, that's the only feedback that I need to give as a coach. I might show some video loop so they can see like when they don't get the barrel to the ball, like what's going on, and they are sort of correcting themselves, but the environment is feeding that. They don't need to feel what's happening in this 1 second or guess what change to make. Like the ball is going to tell them when things are good or bad. And that environment is so needed. It's really hard to create that without the tools to really give them that feedback, and the change can happen so much faster when you have
interesting. Laura, you go, because I'm interested in what you're going to say, because you made a comment before we even started this about like implements and strength and conditioning and our like comfort levels in certain environments with different implements and not. So you can go, and then I had a thought that I wanted to share when you finished.
Where I actually wasn't going to go there directly, but where I was going to say is that Katie's ability, I think in Katie's example, she's a great example of like, because she trained, it's a very high likelihood that because she trained in an environment that allowed her to develop problem solving and solutions,
Right.
that the actual reason that at this point in her career she can tap into verbal cues and that she can make that connection is because her body awareness, her kinesthetic awareness has been so heightened because she's been able to problem solve. Her body is not like fighting for survival every single time she goes through her swing, because it knows it can adapt. It's been trained to adapt. And so what Ashley mentioned is, I always find myself saying this phrase when I'm explaining, the role of long bats, short bats, and changing implements and plyos, is like, I mean, there are, strength and conditioning has a science and an art to it, as any coaching practice does. And you will find professionals in strength and conditioning who know this level of like, okay, I tweak this variable, I do this many reps for this many weeks. It's like, we change the weight, we change the load, we progress, we regress, you change the exercise. And then, and I'll just use softball as the example, and I'm going to use pitching. And then we've told pitchers, just throw a 7-ounce ball and do the same thing all the time and only do it ever at 100% intensity. But you have to adapt, and you've got to adapt. But we've given you nothing to actually adapt to, and no implement to do that, no tool to do that. The way we've sort of taught this, like, you've got to adapt, is we've just made pitching harder. And in some cases, I think hitting has been the opposite. We've made hitting easier in order to make those adaptations. It's like you hold the ball still, or you only pitch at 100% intensity, or you only break it down in these pieces. It's like we've tried to introduce adaptation sort of like through fatigue, or by making the task a heck of a lot simpler and not actually realistic. And that's not just our sport. That's across a lot of sports.
Right.
But I would argue that, like, Katie's ability now is because of the environments that she trained in, because she has that kinesthetic awareness. When you talk about a young athlete needing to have, or our college athletes, let's just take an athlete who doesn't have Katie's body type awareness. They need the external result. They need the HitTrax data, the Rapsodo data, to tell them good or bad, because they don't have the body match yet. Their problem solving is like, they have to sort of skip over, I don't quite feel that, but the result was good. And that's the match that we're trying to make, is I feel it. Oh, and the result was friggin' good, right? And hitters know that, pitchers know that. You know, they're like, can I swing one more time? Can I throw one more? Because that was a bad one. They feel it, but connecting it to the result is what actually brings that feedback full circle for them. And I would argue with Katie, it's the reason she taps into, verbal adjustments so well, and why young kids can't. They just can't yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's crazy. I've had this conversation a lot on the hitting side lately, is like, in addition to the fact that we make the task easy in hitting, we also all hit in cages now. And so the external feedback is horrible. It's literally horrible. It is feeding a generation of hitters who can only go right center, because they think that's the good result, because that's all they can see. We've literally created tunnel vision of what is a good hit. And so I think we've the amazing part of the fact that you can go to walk down the street and hit off the machine and get in a cage, that's great. We have so much more access to these places. I think not until I hit off like quarter machines until I was like a senior in college. Like, the places like that didn't exist when we were growing up. You had to like go outside to like a mini golf place and hit off a baseball machine, And so that's amazing that it exists, but it has come with this giving, when there is external cues, it's not great. And it's why sometimes I'll be like, okay, try to pull, we talk about trying to pull it a lot, not bad, pull it in the air, pull it for power. And they, even in the cage, need to turn around and look at the HitTrax, because they don't know what it looks like to pull a ball, because they've hit in this like tunnel vision for so long. And that part is crazy. I was just thinking when you were talking about the sort of adaptations, we just, James and I were just talking, we had an athlete recently start who did not great on the movement assessment, like failed some stability things, and is lifting with us and is like doing great in lifting. And he said something like, it's kind of surprising that she failed those things. Maybe it's just because she hadn't done it before. And I said, well, don't forget you're loading her now. And I think it's just like we will have athletes who fail a lateral lunge in an assessment, and when the weight on the strength floor is being held in a certain place, they can accomplish that movement better, because they have been loaded in a way that allows them to feel that movement better and accomplish it. It's like that happens all the time in strength and conditioning,
where it slows them down. That's the other
slows
thing
them
I think
down.
slows them down. Mm-hmm.
Right. And they can move better. They can pass the test, or it looks like, wait, why would this athlete not be able to
Right.
lateral lunge? It's like, well, you've loaded her in a way that she can accomplish the task easier. That's the point. That's what we're doing
Right.
over here. And so now probably the next time she goes into the thing, if we're sort of like giving her those things in strength and conditioning, she will pass it over here when she understands how to move it. But that we do those things all the time. It's like you hold a weight in strength and conditioning here versus down versus a bar versus whatever, because it feeds the athlete's ability to accomplish that task appropriately. And then you can create, progress it over time and make them have to problem solve the movement more by not having them do that thing that we do all the time. It's very much the same. And then hitting, I think you just like, we use the smash balls a lot for the machine. And sometimes I'll say like, today you have to finish with real balls because you need to feel when it sucks. Like even that is a feel. Like you need
Embrace
to feel when it jams you. And we want to be able to do reps. And so we can't do that all the time in hitting because you'll just like destroy people's hands. But sometimes you need to feel that. And we've removed so much of that in hitting training. You're not going to feel bad off the tee. You're not even going to feel bad off front toss. You might not barrel it, but you don't know that you didn't barrel it because you didn't get jammed. It didn't sting. It didn't give you this negative sense of feedback. And then you're in a tiny cage and you're like, that seemed fine. And meanwhile, it's a grounder to the shortstop, 20 miles an hour lower than what you normally hit it. And you had no idea. And we fed you that feedback so much. And so that's what the tools are about. It's like, I'm going to put this long bat in your hands. It's going to, if you are, casting, I'm just going to use like a general word people use, you are casting or whatever, that long bat's going to make that very hard for you to even do. And then when you do, if you do it still and you sort of like drag, it's going to feel really crappy. You're going to hit that off the end of your bat or off the handle of the bat. It's not going to feel good. And so we've created now a space where you're getting so much input to start to learn how to not feel that again. And then you're going to make adaptations based off of that. And without that, it's just so hard to do. So what we'll say, to Ashley's point, is like when our remote athletes don't have training implements like a bat, at a minimum, it's like, well, then we got to try to skew where your training is mostly angle and machine. So at least the intensity of the training is feeding you some feedback. We can't do too much regular bat T. Like that's just not a good idea. Like we're not going to really make adaptations that way. Even if we feel like we are, or we're like doing the drill right, it's not going to stick. And so we have to kind of create those things.
I think the importance is understanding what adaptation means. This is like the science part. I do think in skill training, people think adaptation is intent. When you just tell them what they need to do better, and then they apply the intent to do it better, that's how adaptations. Right. And that's not what it looks like from a scientific lens to create adaptations. Like think of a basic highway, brain, like highways to your body to tell it to move certain ways. We have to retrain those pathways. We have to retrain how the brain communicates to the body to get the body to tap into different movement solutions. Like it's a science to it. This is not just like, once I think it, I'm good. You have to really like create new pathways to the body. And so when we slow an environment down, Laura, you brought up, I was like, ooh, we're on the same wavelength today. Because I was going to say people sit in too low in an environment with hitting, but it's the opposite in pitching. I had that thought earlier and then you brought it up. So way to steal it. But you want to do both. And here is why. This is the really key piece to creating those different pathways, those different highways from brain to body. You have to bring it into an environment where you can start establishing some of those new pathways. This is feel, right? This is like lower the intensity, because at high intensity, when the skill is just going at 100 miles
lower
per hour.
The intensity, but keep it the task, which is why
keep it the task. Or a T drill, a K drill, where we never even get in that position. So keep the task, but lower the intensity, okay? And then get the body so you can feel it at a slightly reduced intensity, right? You can feel your brain can understand that. And then give the implements where the body and the brain now start to understand like, oh, this is what it's supposed to do. And now you create this environment where those pathways are actually being created. They are actually moving in the ways that you want them to at a higher intensity. Now, if you just leave it at that, now we're in trouble, because when you don't eventually prioritize its ability to take those pathways and get them to tap into them quicker at a higher intensity, then all of a sudden now it doesn't matter. And that's where maybe it might look okay in a certain drill, right? And so you have to understand it's first about knowing what it's supposed to look like, getting in an environment with the implements, with the appropriate intensity where the new pathways can be developed. And then you have to challenge them in the real environment all the time. And that's what training is, right? It's what it is. Absolutely. And so I think like when you're in the, like, we're just trying to build these new pathways and you just lower intensity, but you don't have any implements, it's probably not going to do it. So now you're going to have a major issue. You're not even establishing the pathways, the new pathways you need. And so now when you go up to high intensity, it's not going to work. And so you need implement. You need the external piece, which is intensity, it's machine, whatever that looks like, angle in, angle out, whatever the details of the skill. But you need the external environment to be set up appropriately, the implement that internally gets your body to sync up and move the way we're asking it to. It's the collision of those two, and then the ability to understand its connectivity and to the actual task at real intensity. And I think it is so interesting that how different the worlds of hitting and pitching can be. And so in hitting, even though I do not think the hitting world, you know how I feel about hitting coaches all across the country, let them come at me. I think even the best hitting people out there, from a pitching lens, when I see what happens in the player development space and hitting, I'm like, I think hitting is way more off the mark than people think it is. And I watch it all the time. I don't understand this concept. We group it in one big cluster. This whole team has a bat path that looks like this. Everyone does X. I'm sorry. The information that we have and what we know about individuality of movement, there's no freaking way. So anyway, side note, and can't wait for the trolls to come after me on that one. However, the hitting world lives in this, we're going to go down and like make their swing better. But I guarantee that the majority of coaches, so I think it's interesting, like think about all the talk about Jerry Glasgow on the machines he carts internationally practically. You know what I mean? Like carrying
swims across the Pacific with him. Right.
But exactly. But what I mean is that like the reason that was like such a big deal is because people don't do that. And it's actually not that big of a deal. It's necessary. He was really trying to target mimicking exactly what they were going to see, right? The translation piece. Now, if he spends the whole year in that world, it's pointless, right?
Well, what I was going to say is we have athletes. So we're in our college, like, they're just starting their off season summer program. And so what we have found is we're dancing this line with our college hitters of like, how far removed can you get from feedback? Meaning, a different bat in your hand, a different star type, lower intensity, like some controlled environment. How far removed can you be of that and still have it translate at full? And so what happens is sometimes we just like if I think of a sort of like standard training session, we do this sometimes because it is eventually you get into the game and it's like you don't get to in between, but like, can I just have one where I do hook them so I can be you have to be removed from the feedback. So the closer to season we get, the more sort of like traditional we follow and how we eventually you're just at full intensity or whatever. But you think of a training session, how I would have done things in the past is like, first we're going to do T, and then we're going to do front toss, and then we're going to do machine. And what we see for our college athletes right now is like, okay, they'll go short machine, and maybe the first week that was hard for them, and now they're starting to really crush that. Like the feedback is really good. They're translating a ton of what they're trying to accomplish in that with those bats, with the start types, with the machine. And then we get into full machine, full speed, a little bit more realistic. And we still have a bat in their hand, and they're going to do a start type, and they're going to go to angle, and all of that's good. We'll go, okay, now it's time. We're going to go, some of the athletes are already starting to do like higher velos. Like we're going to go fast, like a higher intensity fastball. and you're going to be regular. And the first 5 they mash, or they mash 2 of them and they can tap into an adjustment really quick. The further removed we get from that, like they're on swing 10, they're on swing 15, the worse that session right now gets, because they don't know how to tap back into the field that we did. And so we are having to do this sort of like, either kind of for the athlete, they know like, let me just do a hook on, let me grab a different bat for a second, let me just like get back to the feel, and then I'll go into full. Some of our athletes they're starting to like cycle back to the machine for a second and then coming back into it. And your goal, as you said, is of course we don't want all of that forever, although that would be what your warm up would be. So it's not like you are going to get that feedback. You can't, like I said, in the middle of an at bat, you can't need that. And so you want the adaptation to stick enough for it. But that's why you're saying it's not just go throw the machine on 65 and let everyone figure it out. It's based on time of year of how much feedback that athlete needs to feel. And of course, as you, like what we're saying about Katie, of course, your goal is that by season, you've fed so much feedback that you can say, hey, get your bat less flat or whatever it is, like something triggers for them that is a little bit more of a sort of internal cue, because they've had so much of that leading up to them. They know what that means. They know actually how to tap into that. And that's your goal. Now, you can't be in that space all year, because then by the time, it's not like, and then when season hits, we only give internal cues. It's like, you better in between that still be feeding the movement solution so that they are still able to tap into
but that's just basic periodization when it comes to programming, right? Like that's basic, like, like you might be in season and you're going to hit twice during the week. And the first day might be a high cycling environment to give that feedback. And the next day is like, boom, all sitting on what you're going to see. Yeah. And that's just basic periodization. I think what's interesting is that, as I've made pretty clear, I think hitting player development in softball is a mess. And I don't think the hitting community thinks it is a mess. I think they think they're
very like group mindset. It's
very group mindset. Absolutely. And I hear the way pitching coaches even talk about hitters and prepping for teams. I'm like, nope, we're off, and they don't know it. I think the difference in pitching is that pitching development is a mess in softball, but we know it's a mess. So at least we've got the awareness, so I'll take that. But I think it's a mess because what we have spent our time on is like conditioning and toughness. It's like, because the workload is so high and because it's conditioning and toughness, and we haven't understood the craft element of it. We haven't understood like how to actually develop the craft, because we never even been able to measure it. Right. And so we didn't know if the craft was growing. And so it's the opposite. We spend, like, I know plenty of pitchers where, I mean, even now, we even know, like, we do consulting with coaches, but we're not the coach of that athlete. So they will sometimes bring feedback, at the college setting and say like, oh, but the pitcher wants to do X and Y. And her feedback was that it was too much of this or too little of this. And oftentimes it's sitting in this sort of like old traditional mindset. It might be June. Their season's not until February of next year, but the much that they want to be at high intensity right now. Right. And we have to work really hard to educate athletes on why they have to be able to come down into a lower intensity to actually impact the arm slot, to get their body and the ball and their arm to sync up differently. This happens all the time in baseball, like all the time in baseball, where they're throwing at different intensities, and just in softball, it's not our culture.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I watched a training session yesterday, a pitching training session in-house, where an athlete was just like, okay, we're going to try to accomplish backspin. We're going to try to learn a rise ball by throwing your 2-seam to a certain part of the plate because of what your arm action does in that pitch. And then when you think of going to that location, it's going to do it. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, can we start to throw that to different parts of the plate, knowing the intent we need of that? And I like watch the athlete like, what am I doing? There's an element of like, because the way we've taught rise ball, like throw a rise ball, like get under it. And so that is what like the implements and the intent and the feedback of the video and the feedback of the data, like when they all come together, it's just, what intent do I need to feed that athlete where it accomplishes that? And at first, that's going to just be from feedback. Like that athlete was literally like, I don't really understand what I'm doing. Like, but I'm accomplishing the ball flight I want. And so then it's like starting to teach them, okay, I felt it. Let me try something different. And they start to learn, like I said, the internal cues on their own. And that's how they tap into it. I was going to say about hitting, we've said this before, but I think the reason hitting, it still looks ahead is because a lot of our fields are 200. We swing with composite bats and we're stronger than we've ever been. And so it's just like when you have good strength and conditioning and you run into the ball, like we have athletes who they might swing and miss a lot of training, but they hit it 80 because they're strong and their bat is hot. And I think that that's the reason, like hitting the sort of strength of the overall athlete has increased tremendously over the past 5 years. And the bats are so hot and the field hasn't gotten bigger. And so I think that's just the reality of it. There's better intent going into hitting. You don't really see many teams who are like, let's just pound the ball on the ground. Like most teams are like, we're trying to hit the ball hard. And then you have these high level athletes that are in it. Where it, I think, is struggling is what is the nuance of getting that power off on a regular basis to different levels?
Actually measured your athletes though, which is what we do. Like you would see like, oh shit, they're actually not changing, right? Like I changed their intent and we've got like, but their swing patterns are not actually changing.
And it's not to say this is bad. This happens at every level, but it's why it becomes so necessary for us to be changing coaches and picking pitches and doing all of those things, because what allows a team often to have success right now in softball is I better pick up that changeup. And if I do, I hit it 82 and I'm going to absolutely mash it. And I just know where it's going. And so you see a lot of guessing, a lot of conversation still around sort of like picking a pitch and knowing. And I think that makes sense. That is the right approach. I'm not saying people shouldn't be doing that, but I don't know that pitching is good enough that we need to be doing that yet.
Sure.
So this isn't like you're watching MLB and you're like, I better guess right, because those two pitches, like who the freak knows between those two pitches.
Right.
There are some pitchers that do that at the highest level, but not a lot right now. And so the fact that we're like, we need to pick a part of the plate. It's like, do we? I don't like, is that what we need to do? But that's kind of how we've had to approach it, because we're banking on the athlete's just overall strength in hitting right now, and that works, and it has.
They get away with it,
and you see high scoring games, and you see all of this because the reality of, like, you look at an Oklahoma hitter now compared to in 1998, and they're giant. You know, they are strong, and they are gonna, if that ball is over the plate and they have that weapon in their hands, they are gonna mash that ball. And that's just the reality. And I don't know if, I think that will run out eventually. And I think the game always is windshield wiping between, you know, there will be conversations of, do we need to change the bats? Do we need to change the ball? Like, do we want less of this? And as the pitchers are getting smarter, like, you're going to have this effect. And have we attacked adjustability? Have we attacked the individuality required in hitting? Like, I don't think so. Not most cases. And we haven't really needed to yet. And so it's like, then you get athletes who had success at athlete. We get hitters who, they hit the ball really hard. They had success at certain levels, and they aren't getting put in the lineup, or they're inconsistent and they don't understand why. And it's like, well, you didn't ever train any adjustability. You just have one swing. It just isn't, it's not going to work. And for whatever reason, your teammate is able to be more adaptable in the swing, and not because they've trained it probably, but just because they are. And so that's what you have to sort of spend your time doing, and hitting doesn't do that well. I mean, people hate that. We had a college athlete come in to check in yesterday, and I had her meeting with her before she came in, and I had to preface it. You know, I said, like, just like, I want to make sure, you know, because she doesn't have a great training environment right now where she is. She's playing in a league. And I was like, I just want to make sure you know that, like, when you come and train, it's probably going to feel really crappy. Yeah. Like, you're going to fail a lot, and the environment is not going to feel great. And, like, it's okay. Like, we need that. We need to see it. But, like, we had to preface it, because for the most part, the way we train the athletes, like, it takes them a minute to like it. And because it's so much failure, and it's not like swing and miss failure, but you're just not going to walk into OGX doors and see people just absolutely mashing all the time. They're mishitting a lot. They're getting a lot of sort of bad feedback because that's what we're trying to create. And it's that balance between the two. But yeah, that's
and it looks so different.
Hitting.
And it looks so different. It takes a lot of education. I was thinking another one for pitching, like it's an intensity concept, but like, another one I really run into, when I write a program or when our coaches write a program, we put so much middle in there, like middle fastballs. And I don't care. I don't even care to ask, like, do you throw fastballs in games? Which some pitchers do and should, and some don't for whatever reason. They have a pitch that, does something similar or better or whatever. But it's irrelevant. It's a training concept.
Right.
And I will have athletes.
It's the same as pulling the ball. When I say pull the ball, people are like, no, I don't want to pull the ball. I'm like,
and it's a training concept. And I have people like, well, I don't even like to throw in the middle in training because I don't like my mindset to ever be there. I'm like, that literally makes no sense. So, I probably have to have a conversation like that with like 10 times a year with athletes where I'm like, let me explain to you, right? This is the idea of like manipulating the arm. You have to establish the neutral. Stability of a pitch first means stability of like the neutral. Like think of a tree. That's the root of any pitch you're going to throw, is to be able to get your arm action to go over and over and over, neutral fastball with no break intent, to go down the middle. And now we manipulate. So if you are ever trying to train command, if you are ever trying to train another pitch type to create break off of something, you have to have a neutral fastball straight down the middle built into your training plan. Like this is a key piece in the path, build the pathway, then connect it to what you actually need to be doing. It's a key piece. And so I think, when you don't educate on that, and most of the times when we educate, and that's just one little example, they're like, oh, okay, I understand. But it's such a mindset of like, this is what training needs to be, right? It's, someone the other day was like, well, this was a college athlete. She's like, the volume is a lot lower than what I usually do. And so at the end, I just like threw a couple more pitches just to like feel it a little more. And I was like, any chance what the like couple more pitches was? And then she was like, it was like, then she counted, it was like, I don't know, somewhere between 35 and like 40 more pitches. I'm like, that's a lot. There's a couple more. And I was like, she didn't know. She's like, I didn't know that. I thought I was, and I'm like, this is a training plan, right? Like every day you're going to show back up and keep working, because this is the concept. They're like, we're trying to create these new pathways from brain to body. It does not happen in one day. You can't throw 40 extra high intensity pitches and get those pathways, because we have trained athletes, like as long as the intent is there and you just try harder, that's the way to do it. And that is not the science of training.
Well, and I think too, and because we said when you try harder, you can do it. When there's a bad result, a lot of times they're like, nope, they just disregard that. It's like, wait, that's part of it. So like in hitting, I'll think like one of the things that happens all the time is like we get our foot down early and we sort of disconnect our swing, and they are early with their body and they're late with their barrel. So this is just like, and so we're constantly kind of common thing is teaching them to be a little later with their body and what that feels like. And so sometimes we'll say like, literally be as late as you can, and they'll get like so jammed. And then even though we told them that intent, they're like, you could see them like disregard that. That was bad. And it's like, no, it wasn't, because it's part of the process of learning how to make these adjustments. So it's like the same thing. We often have the intent of pulling the ball in the air. You cannot do it without clean rotation. It is a great training tool, but that is so scary to people because they have been told not to pull the ball. And also it's like, well, now I don't want to only pull the ball. Now I'm never going to get to an outside pitch. It's like, this is a training thing. This is literally trying to make adaptation by the intent you are focused on. And I think in hitting, and I know in pitching, like you just see them, they like throw a ball on the ground. They're like, whoa. And they're like, well, I want that to be out of my brain. It's like, no, keep it in. It's literally giving you feedback. And the same thing of hitting, of like all of these bad hits, the way you're going to have the most adaptation is absorb the bad results, make an adjustment, not just like one it harder, but do something a little different, feel what that felt like. If you had a good result in the next one, then like try to replicate that. What did you feel in that? What was the intent in that? What was the change that you did? Can you replicate it at this intensity? That's all you want to do. But I see that all the time in hitting. Like there's a bad result and you can see them almost actively want to just like disregard it. And it's like, literally, we are creating training environments where you sometimes have bad results, and they are part of what you need to learn. They are
In summary, reason number 3,432 why a standard hitting and pitching lesson is garbage is because it is a single session, probably not linked to programming, where you are never going to establish these pathways. You're not going to make change in a single session. Probably the training environment does not support you. It doesn't have the implements. It's not thoughtful in the way where actual training, like pathways, the adaptations can actually even occur in the first place. Forget the frequency. Right. And third, it's just all result driven. If the result goes where it's supposed to go, who cares?
Well, let's be clear. It's result driven of like without data. And so I would say,
it's eyeball result.
Yes, result might be fine if it's like, you hit that ball 75. Yeah, okay, great. That's really good feedback. How did we hit that ball so hard that time? And that is feedback. But just like, I think back to like 10 years ago when you and I were giving this type of lesson, and if someone like hit a ball right back at you and you're like, good. And it was like, was that good? Is that what we were going for? Was that a good result?
Sure.
Was it?
Absolutely. Like, just celebrate. You celebrate what you think looks good.
Subjective bias. Yeah,
absolutely.
Subjective bias.
And it's not linked to anything. So it's just,
and that's like, that comment's not negative. Like, it's just our eyeballs. We are all about that. Like Krista, you mentioned your example was like Oklahoma, big and strong, is like, will that always play? Probably. Right. But like, we have these scenarios.
Big and strong kids. So
right. That'll play. But we have these scenarios. We definitely have these experiences, I think, as we sort of sit externally, I'll say from the college game, from a coaching standpoint, internally from a consulting standpoint, where, we watch coaches sometimes have really early on success because what they bring to a new team or, their thought process is just, it's a little different than maybe what that team has experienced in the past. And it's successful. Could be hitting, could be pitching, pick either one. And I just think like that's absolutely necessary, like to come in and kind of shake up and disrupt and see improvement. To me, the sticking point of this concept of like adapt or die in coaching is if you keep doing that. Like where I sort of see coaches kind of go in either one direction or the other is, I'm never going to adapt. And the thing that worked for me as a coach to train my athletes in this way, to teach them to do things this way, it worked for a long time. But now, and I just keep thinking like, player development is the evolution of the game, right? Because like pitching does this, hitting does this, pitching does this. Mm-hmm. We're constantly doing that. And so if your approach to pitching or hitting or anything else in the game is, I'm just going to do it the way that we've always done it, and I'm going to be unwilling to like step away from my truths, and you're getting hammered, boy, I got to argue, man, it's time to adapt. Or literally like, you're just going to not have success. And I think athletes have the same thing. It's like, the most common story is, I threw 60 at 14 and now I'm 18. I don't throw any harder. And it's like, what were you given to adapt to? You did strength and conditioning for 3 months, one time a year in the off season. You've only thrown a 7-ounce ball. You've only swung a 34 drop 10. Yeah. You've done it a million times.
Well, I had a sales call with a pitcher this week I talked to the girl. She was very mature. I enjoyed the conversation, a teenager, but she was like, I've been with my pitching coach for a while, and for 3 years I gained 10 miles per hour, and now I'm stuck. And I was like, okay. It's the story we hear all the time. It's like, that was puberty. That's great. Yes. And that's awesome. And now you're stuck where everyone else is stuck because there's nothing changing in your program. There's no adaptations. There's no measurements. And like, that's what happens to everyone. So it's like that's just the sort of nature of the game. All right.
In summary, in one more final
Don't just
summary.
pick up a ball or a regular bat.
No. And I think it's amazing. We have this incredible assessment process. And obviously we have lots of people that are coming for our assessment, which is amazing. But it still kind of drives me nuts because I know that player development it's not good as we do it. It is horrible out in the rest of the world. It just is. The gap between how we handle training and player development and the standard training environments out in the country, it doesn't belong in the same universe. And so there are so many people who are coming for assessments and then they're like, we'll check back in for another assessment. Can you do that? Absolutely. We'll see in 3-4 months. But there is some world where I hope people are listening to this and realizing like what it takes to actually make change, what it takes, the environment, the programming, the information you need. There is no way that that's what you feel like you're getting. And so I hope that as we're starting to see more and more people that are opting out of training, because they're like, I have my pitching coach, I have my hitting coach, and they just keep coming for these assessments once a quarter, they start to like this awakening, right? Of like, wait a second, that's not what I'm,
there's
like,
more
not
coaches out there that are able to sort of
for sure. We're trying to grow in that.
Which there are.
For sure.
Yeah, which there are. So that's
right.
the sort of goal of it. All right. Well, until next week, who knows what we'll talk about.
Godspeed to all.
To us too. So good luck to everyone.